education to change the global leadership patterns. Hello to you, ladies and gentlemen. It's another edition of Global Insider. And for you, Media Africa, thank you for taking this rendezvous. Today, we want to look at leadership and, of course, asking the question if education is a major tool that can be used to change the leadership patterns, especially in the world that is evolving rapidly. It is often said that the world is undergoing drastic changes, and it is necessary also to bring some sort of practical changes in the sphere of leadership, especially global leadership pattern that will be intentional and transformational in the present day society. Of course, welcome to this new rendezvous of Global Insider, where today we explore the ever-changing landscape of global leadership or ecosystem of leadership and its impact on society. We want to focus on the role of education in defining leadership patterns in today's challenging global world. What role can education play in shaping the future leaders of the world, and how these leaders in turn influence the political, social, and economic dynamics of the globalized or interconnected world? We aim to shed light on the transformative power of education in redefining leadership paradigms and also fostering positive change on a global scale. So join us, ladies and gentlemen, on this informative and discursive program. It is Global Insight, as we navigate the potentials or the feasibility of education to transform the leadership patterns in the present day society, a world that is evolving and a lot of changes happening across political, economic, social levels, and you can name the rest. So we want to see how the leadership patterns existing in the global world can be defined using education to change perspectives around the globe. It is informative and discursive, as already outlined. So without wasting time, we're going straight away to uncover or unveil the panel of experts that will throw more light on our topic for discussion, answering the question, the role of education, the impact of education in redefining leadership in the global world at large. Let me take you now to the North African nation of Algeria. We are going to meet Professor Layith Zaglami, who is in charge of information and communication in the Algiers University. Hello to you, Professor Layith. A pleasure having you again on Global Insight.
Hello, Clarice, to you and to Danny and all people around you and your staff. I am so pleased to be with you again, and thank you for the invitation.
And also thank you for accepting to be with us to share your understanding of the topic, and of course with the aim to change narratives around the global world as far as the 21st century leadership is concerned. To Russia, we're going to meet Yulia Berg, political scientist and also a founder of Globe as Expert Club. Hello to you, Yulia. Pleasure having you once again. While waiting for Yulia, let's acknowledge the presence of Daniel Kovalik, American human rights lawyer and also a human rights activist. Hello to you, Mr. Kovalik. Welcome to the Pan-African Television. It is for you, Media Africa.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here. Thank you very much.
And of course, we are so delighted to have you share insight on this particular topic of utmost importance, leadership and education. I will kick off, of course, the discussion with you, Mr. Kovalik. We're talking education and its role in changing leadership patterns. But then I will acknowledge, if you appreciate, we define the key words here, which are education and leadership. In your perspective, in the context of this topic for this day, how can we define education and leadership?
Well, education obviously is more than just teaching people facts. I mean, the main thing that you need to educate students in is how to think and how to think critically and how not to accept, the so-called truths that are handed down to them from the media, from their government. And in terms of leadership, I think it has to be emphasized that, obtaining power is not about leadership, right? That leadership, I think, in the modern world, again, is attempting to teach people how to be able to unite their fellow brothers and sisters in struggle against oppression, against injustice in a very unjust world. I think, for me, when I taught at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, I taught international human rights law for 12 years. And I really tried to turn the world on its head for people. As an American and teaching people in the United States, my main goal was, frankly, to undermine the idea of American exceptionalism, the idea that somehow the U.S. was this indispensable nation in the world and that there's other nations in the world that we can learn from, other systems we can learn from. And again, I try to emphasize the need to be critical of the basic assumptions that the students, came to the class with.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kovalik, for the introductory statement. We move on to Algeria with Professor Laïd. We want to get your own understanding of the key terms, leadership and education, as we unveiled the potentiality of education in changing the leadership patterns across the global world.
Yes, for sure, education is a key factor in, first of all, knowing this, exploring the world around you. And without learning, without knowledge, you can do nothing. You are just illiterate. And therefore, we need to have to be educated and to know about it. And at the core center of values of education is learning, is interacting, is taking the initiative, is exploring the whole world, is more than that. It's not only swallowing all what we are told, but you have to have this initiative spirit. You have to have this critical. You have to have this critical thinking, and of course, besides that, in parallel, you have to develop, to advocate academic freedom. In other words, those who are being educated, they have to ask questions, and you have to remove all this method of learning by heart or just dictating what you should do. No, you have to teach your people the way they have to do it in very pedagogic way, in bearing in mind they are intelligent as everyone, and therefore you have to develop, to advocate pedagogic and interactive method that help them to explore and to develop within their own capacity, because they have their own disposition and their own potentiality, and only you are here to coach them and to give them a chance to explore and to strengthen their capacity.
And of course, thank you so much. Just to remind our televiewers that this is a Global Insider on For You Media. You're most welcome. And we want to look at it, coming back to you, Mr. Kovalik. Do you think education is a better tool to change the global leadership patterns? Let's look at the developments that have occurred around the global world, especially along geopolitical lines, and the way the leadership of the world is solving interconnected problems. And now a problem has been identified, and of course we see education. Does education really present as a major tool to change the narratives surrounding the leadership around the global world in maybe the present context and of the state of affairs around the world?
Yes, of course. Education is a critical part of doing that, of changing the world. I think that all the great leaders understood that. When you look at the world today, I think, as you say, it's changing rapidly. The center of gravity in the world is shifting from the West to the East into the global South, and I think that's a good thing. And I think students need to understand that. And they need to understand the history of the world and the history of colonialism and how that has shaped the world. Particularly in the West, I think that is something that young people, well, they're starting to understand it. But I think they need a greater grasp of how the world has been negatively impacted by settler colonialism, and why and how that factor is leading to the changes we see today, right? When we see African nations now rejecting the West, rejecting their former colonial leaders like France. When we see the world uniting against Israel and its oppression of Gaza. These are very important historic events, but unless you understand the history that came before, it's impossible to understand what's happening now and why. And I think also, again, I think it's Karl Marx who said, it's not just about learning about the world, but it's about learning how to change it, right? That's what philosophy is about. And I think that's got to be a critical part of education.
Of course, learning how to change the global world. And Professor Laïda, what role do you think emerging powers, we hear talking about the BRICS, of course, and maybe to particularize, let's identify China and India in playing the role that they can play in shaping global leadership dynamics. And of course, with the changing narratives and the place of education in ensuring that this bloc or individual nations that are getting stride in the world's economy, the role they can play to change narratives in the leadership patterns.
For sure. Human potentiality are the key factors of development and also progress worldwide. So, any strong economy should rely on the quality and the skillfulness of their human potentiality. That's why, as you mentioned, countries like China and so forth, they have invested heavily on human capital. And that is why it is important to consider the human being as the key element in the equation of progress and development. And of course, it's clear that we have to focus. And I take the example of my own country as just a matter of preference for the Algerian government for the last years, and so they have dedicated almost 25% of the budget to education, to learning, to training, everything about the human being. And as I said, this 25% of the budget of the country is almost invested in human. Just why we want to secure his dignity, his respect, his competency, his independence, and we want him to be able to empower himself and to take in charge his own responsibility. And I am pleased to say that Algeria has been doing great in terms of education. Just for a matter of fact, right now we have almost 12 million pupils are enrolled in the three cycles of education: primary, secondary, and in the college. Besides, over 2 million students are now enrolled at universities. So, can you imagine how the importance of investing, of giving chance to your human potential to be enrolled and to learn, because learning. So if you are learning, if you have been good education, you will not be colonized, you will not be mistreated, you will not be cheated. So you know your rules, your responsibility, your duty, and so forth.
Now that, of course, when Mr. Dane was talking earlier on, he identified, of course, the change that has come due to the fact that leaders or people are now conversant with the developments around the world, and there is need for change to happen. Professor, I'm staying with you. How can we use, leadership lapses? We still have leadership problems, governance problems across the African continent, and we see a new generation of leadership that is actually coming up. In your own perspective, what do you think to be able to maintain and shift, have a paradigm shift from the conservative leadership that we know that has been in play in Africa, and of course the leadership that the new generational leaders can implement, and to see transformation around every aspect of the continent? How do you think this can be attained? If we want to capitalize on the changes which have occurred, and how we can use a tool like education to change narratives across the leadership atmosphere or sphere in the African continent in entirety. Professor Laid, are you with me?
Yes, I am. Sorry, what did you say?
We are looking at the changing that has happened, or the changes which have happened across the African continent, like Mr. Kovalit highlighted already, that a new generation of leaders actually emerging in a very complex world. And today we are looking at how leadership patterns can be transformed at the global level that will ensure, in fact, in place the way of solving interconnected crisis. So the question is, how can we capitalize on education to change this pattern of leadership across the African continent with the new generation leaders to ensure that we shift from the conservative patterns of leadership to a new way of leading that will be that will accommodate the changing times across the continent?
Yes, you are quite right, because the intervention should be not only at the local level, it should be at the regional as well as continental level. And I think, from my knowledge, African Union, and there is a commission for education science, and of course, besides that, they are working together with the Association of African Universities. So there are some schemes around within the continent, and particularly at the leadership of African Union and Addis Ababa. People, politicians have set up a methodology and approach to get some kind of excellency in synergy between different countries, just to, of course, to encourage and to value the potentiality, the potential of a human being through education. And I understand very much that now, as I said already in some event, I said we have by the education system, if it is strong one, if it is really based on interactivity and competency and empowerment and so forth, we should remove all bad ideas. Because so until now, we have, let's make it clear, as you mentioned in your question, there is some kind of conservatism still remain in force, because people who are not educated, who have not learned, they stick to they are opposed to any change, and there is some kind of resistance to change. That's why we should open up, we should give chance to everyone to be educated, especially for kids, for women, I would say for women, because they maybe are underrepresented. That's why, and unfortunately, what I see now, what is happening now in north of Nigeria with the kidnapping of school girls, it's a shame for Africa that we still not preventing girls from going to school. I think we should develop this idea of equality between girls and boys when it comes to education. And a good society, a stable society, a coherent society, a harmonious society should give a chance to both girls and boys in order to live in harmony and in great respect. That's what we should now consider for the future of generation. And the key element of that is through education, by offering. Of course, I understand that education requires a lot of money. Requires, of course, logistics, but also good politics. That's what is most important. When I speak about politics, I am speaking about a good pedagogy. I am speaking about a good way of teaching. And more importantly, are those who are the leader, are those who are the teacher, the lecturer, who are in charge of teaching. They should develop, they should advocate new techniques of I would say, new methods, new pedagogic methods that interact, that more to emphasize on the importance of the potential of the students, rather just to deliver courses and without any interaction or without any following up.
Okay, thank you so much. I think it's time for us to welcome Julia Berg, political scientist and founder Global's Expert Club. Hello to you, Julia. Welcome to the program. We are already analyzing some of the peculiarities of the topic for this, the education and its capacity or potential in changing leadership patterns. So I welcome you with this the question. Of course, we're looking at how we can change leadership patterns by overcoming a traditional mindset using education to attain this objective.
Well, I think one of the keys is that we should not overcome the traditional mindset, but we should get back to it to a great extent. Because when we talk about leadership and the type of leadership that is required in, or let's say after our transformative times, a lot of it would be about sovereignty. A lot of it would be about being honest with oneself and with people around, right? So a lot of generations, or let's say the new generations of the time, were raised in a very confusing environment when they had to question their own background, they had to question their own traditions, they had to question their own values. A lot of people were taught that money is on top of everything else and that any means are acceptable to get wealthy. So we have quite a lot of deformations in the current educational system as well, especially when we look at the countries that were dominated dominated by the West, right? Because together with proclaimed democracy and proclaimed development, what was in many cases brought were attempts to erase history or rewrite history, basically saying all of you guys were pretty much barbarians. Then we came, and then we managed to bring some civilization across. And this is valid not only for Africa and Asia, countries like India, but also for Eastern Europe, because the changes that occurred in the Eastern Europe, starting from, let's say, the 80s and, of course, the 90s, were a complete disaster in terms of that. So the value system was knocked down, and the value system that was putting strategic collective interests on top of individual interests was knocked down. And now we see the outcomes, right? A lot of destruction, a lot of messed up businesses, a lot of messed up industrial venues, a huge share of businesses of those countries were just sold out, including critical infrastructure, including, all of those areas related to healthcare and fundamental science, which was basically laying foundations for the future. So I would say that what's essential for the global leadership of the new time is being able to be sovereign, to know one's roots, where one is coming from, and to be honest. Also, because we're entering a completely new, or we have already entered a completely new information era, and it means that everything has become transparent. There is no more privacy. There is the artificial intelligence and big data analysis that is able to know us better sometimes than even we do ourselves. And it means that either we accept ourselves and are honest and transparent, or nothing would change.
Indeed, talking about the changes that we need to see in this transformative world, I stay with you, Yulia. We're looking at, you've highlighted something quite well about the capacity of the present leadership of the world in solving interconnected crises. I can put it in this word. I remember during our last discussion with Steve Gill, who highlighted that if we can have a leadership that will not spend money on arms or maybe buying sponsoring wars, instead we have a leadership that will invest in infrastructure development to benefit the mankind. So the question is, now that we're looking at education as that major tool that we can use to change the leadership patterns, what do you think? Do you think the scope is even available to capitalize on this aspect of education to change narratives surrounding the global leadership, especially in the world of today?
Absolutely so. Yet the investment in education pays off 10 or even 20 years after, right? So first you invest in education, and then you see the results in 10 or 20 years. So that's why many are not thinking about this kind of investment, and leadership that comes just for 1 or 2 terms of 4 years wouldn't even be able to see the fruits, right, of the investment. And that's one of the problems, because it requires strategic thinking, and it requires a certain power system, right, that is able to focus on strategic goals rather than short-term.
Oh, thank you so much. Continuing the discussion with you, Mr. Kovalik, looking at investing in education, you know, let's look at the place of the investment in skills development. You were talking earlier on and highlighted the fact that many countries in Africa have now become conversant with the challenges that have been facing, especially as far as the presence of the West and even their colonial masters are concerned. So now we're looking at education as that catalyst to turn things around. How can this be attained in the sphere of skills development to ensure intentional or people-oriented and transformational leadership to tackle the 21st century challenges that the global world is facing, and even in anticipation of what will happen in the years to come?
Yes, well, I think when you're talking about skills that people need for the 21st century, obviously technological skills, computer skills, learning about artificial intelligence, and computer technology are going to be very critical, particularly for the global South, right? Because the West has de-developed the global South. The global South has some catching up to do, and I think that, you know, training young people in the most, you know, cutting edge technology of the day is critical to get their countries again caught up so that they can be leaders in the new economy. But not just that. I mean, the other skills, of course, that come to mind are legal skills. Look at what South Africa is doing at the ICJ with this case against Israel, right? South Africa is a leader in the world now in international human rights. It is the leader in the world. And we need more South Africas in the world to be taking a leadership against this type of oppression that's happening in Gaza. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. But education is a key component to that. Teaching young people about international human rights law, teaching them legal skills, teaching them negotiation skills. These are skills that, you know, will be applicable in any situation, but again, particularly in the modern world. And if you look at the United States, for example, it has totally given up on teaching even its leaders about negotiation skills, about diplomacy, right? The U.S. was pretty good at that at one time. Now it relies totally on force. And that's why people in other countries have to pick up that slack and learn about diplomacy and modern negotiations so we can bring about peaceful results.
It's about bringing about a peaceful result, especially to interconnected problems affecting the global world at large. Just to remind you that if you're just tuning in, you're on to For You Media Africa, and this is the platform Global Insider. We are analyzing the role of education in changing leadership patterns across the global world, maybe in the spheres of politics, geopolitics, economy, and most especially a leadership pattern that will cultivate a spirit of, like Yulia underlined already, it is imperative not to change the traditional mindset, but to derive policies that are applicable to the environment where we find ourselves, to ensure a leadership that will be favorable to the population. Coming back to you, Professor Laida, you know, we want to look at how universities can work together across the global world. It is about charting the way for partnership, win-win partnership, exchange of knowledge and exchange of expertise. So in what ways can educational institutions collaborate on a global level, especially on issues of international relations. If the Republic of South Africa was able to stand firm on the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, it's because the country has developed an international conversations with the international politics, and is able to make the country's voice heard on international matters of utmost importance. So now, how can educational institutions collaborate on these aspects to ensure that the change, the mindset across Africa, patterning issues of maybe international magnitude, and how the African continent also can make its voice heard on such major issues that do not only affect international bodies but the continent as well?
Yeah, sure. What you said is quite right, and I understand that overall the world, of course, maybe we can mention what is doing, what UNESCO so far, which is United Nations for Education and Science, is doing on global level. But when it comes to the partnership between universities, of course, I think there is a key word we should always speak about it or mention it. Is decolonizing the mind. Of course, I'm not against to keep our mindset traditional one, but you have to adapt to this new requirement, to the new situation, to the new progress, and therefore you are not supposed to deprive of all of your originality, of your specificity, of your particularity. All what you have to do is to adapt what you have as inner values with the requirement of the situation worldwide. And from that, we speak, we have to always get confidence on yourself, build your own confidence, and then you can get into partnership with different parts of the world. So the key word is decolonizing our mind, decolonizing our method of education. We have for the last years, and so many countries in the third world, I would say, have been developing an attitude of I would say of colonization. They feel always belittled when it comes to Western countries, Western education, Western civilization, yeah. and therefore they are at the mercy of all values. They have, I would say, not learned a lot. I give you an example from Algeria. Algeria in the 1960s, 70s and 80s, when they got their independence, of course, there was a huge, very ambitious program to order students to go to Europe to learn about education and to transfer the knowledge. That's exactly the aim of the authority at that time. And there were about 25,000 people, students who were enrolled in main very famous universities in Europe, in USA, in Canada, in Great Britain, of course, in USSR, former Soviet Union, as well as main in Europe and some part in the Arab world. Unfortunately, the result are so many of them didn't come back. Why? Because when they came back to Algeria, their own host country, they found very difficult. They found it very difficult to adapt to what they have learned, because the environment has not changed, and there are a lot of bureaucracy, there are a lot of administrative obstruction, so they couldn't adapt. More than that, the country is still not developed to provide for them all the facilities and the condition to put into practice what they have learned. And therefore, there was the phenomenon, the syndrome of brain drain. And exactly now we try to what we call brain gain by inviting them going back. Now within the possibility offered by technology, we can have e-learning and so forth. But overall, I think at the basis, education is based on morality, on moral values, on peaceful harmony, peaceful solution, on respect to each other, but not. That's exactly we should respect each other. And I think there is another element. It's about education is about information and about communication. Is about dialogue. If you speak to each other, if you interact with each other, for sure you avoid the war, you avoid conflict, you avoid crisis all over the world. That's why we have to develop this education, which prompt you to discuss, to understand, but on equal base, on respect basis. That is most important from my own view.
Indeed, education is about information, it's about communication, it's about ensuring a proper understanding of stakes in the global world, to ensure that the principles that govern the world are actually favorable for mankind. Let me come back to you, Yulia, trying to correlate what Professor said and what you underlined earlier on. I quite remember for the times we've been on the field appraising the Russia-Ukraine crisis, to the people we spoke to, according to highlighted that the fact that when the crisis started, some decisions taken by leaders of institutions to stop teaching children using the Russian language, and of course trying to implement some new models into the minds of the children. Let's look at how the changes or the crisis that the global world is going through, that leaders are actually making some sort of decisions which are helping, let me put it this way, to kill even the intellect of the students or the young people, making it very difficult for them to understand the stakes or the narratives of what is going through. So how do we're looking at how some of these decisions that leaders take because of their political or geopolitical interests, how it's hampering especially the mindsets of young people, and how it's affecting negatively leadership patterns, and how can this be reversed?
Well, unfortunately, there are quite a lot of examples when a change in political regime and change in political priorities would change the educational system completely. So that would lead to history books being rewritten. Yeah. That's why now again, in order to be safe, we need to make sure that children learn to learn in the first place. So the ability to have developed cognitive skills, the ability to apply critical thinking, to use several different sources of information and try to make critical analysis of all the information coming in is essential. Also, we see quite a lot of fake news circulating, quite a lot of fake information, and sometimes it's so sophisticated that the ones who are not ready to use their analytical skills when they go through all of the data, but they're doomed to use the ready served decisions made for them. And Ukraine that you brought up is a great example of how within just one generation, the change of educational system was able to raise hatred against the Russian Federation, against the Russians, starting from, I mean, that hatred is touching upon everyone. And we saw, unfortunately, many examples of how, even children in Russia are being attacked or being insulted on the internet. That hatred is, widespread. And we see how children in Ukraine were indoctrinated into that alternative model of thinking that basically implies that all of the Russians are enemies, regardless of, who they are, what they do, and whatsoever else. So you can see many examples of that. across the media, you can see a lot of examples of how even businesses would spread that information. And I think Dan Kovalik, who is present in this program as well, can confirm that the school books for children that were made in Ukraine were also serving the purpose of disseminating that hatred. I think he was exposed to seeing some of those materials. So we see how fast that can change, especially when we talk about young brains, when we talk about young people that are still too flexible. And there are a lot of other examples of quite extreme practices, not even theories, that children are being pulled into, right? So in some countries, we see clear examples of let's say, trying to normalize relations of adults and minors. In some cases, we see attempts to normalize quite perverted behavior. In many cases, we see examples of trying to normalize quite complicated and, let's say, anti-biological gender approaches, right? Sure. So we see all of the statistics that show that, using educational system, also trying to separate children from their parents and to affect their brains actively while those are at schools, lead to protests and lead to complaints from the side of the parents in order to be able to make sure that while their children are in school, they're getting actual knowledge and not being indoctrinated into sometimes even destructive theories and practices.
And of course, which is very harmful to the future of the nation, the future generation, when a mindset is not the best for the children. Let me come to you, Mr. Kovalik. Listening critically, especially this is a very critical point that we just highlighted about how the disagreement between political maybe countries can infringe into the curriculum of institutions. So the question is, how can these institutions stop being political and work with the sole purpose of educating the younger population and actually instilling knowledge in the minds of the younger ones? And also, in your own perspective, in what ways can educational institutions, especially at the international level, collaborate or cultivate political leadership that is inclusive and responsive to diverse societal needs?
Yes, well, obviously you raise very important questions. Obviously I'm a big supporter of public education, free public education, which is important for any society. Of course, though, when it's government funded, as it would have to be, you're always going to have some ideological component to the education, right? That's going to try to reproduce the values of the society and of the government, really. And some of those are good values, some are not. Again, speaking from an American perspective, a lot of what we learn, particularly in history class, either ignores the settler colonial history of the United States or in some ways glorifies it, right? And most students come out of school not knowing or understanding, what damage the U.S. has done to its own indigenous population and around the world. So how do we change that? That's the question. I think we need to, those of us who care about these issues need to create, supplemental educational systems. I know folks who are working to build free schools that are run by volunteers that try to teach alternative histories to those of the, mainstream history. And again, in a country like the United States, that's critical, so that you have people who grow up and again, are critical of their government, are critical of the military-industrial complex, critical of the fact that the United States spends $1 trillion a year on war. And that will only come, I think, through, again, these alternative type of educational processes, which need to be encouraged.
Indeed, it's about addressing the challenges surrounding the educational system across the global world to mitigate the negative effects of such on the younger generation. Let me come back to what you said earlier on, Professor Laid, about the collaboration between universities. We see where students are being sent out to garner knowledge, to gain some expertise, and then to come back to implement, of course, what they've learned in their national countries of origin. So that is a problem that we still face today in most African countries, and we're looking at the scope where the scope provided, especially by the political class, when we talk economy or social whatsoever, the decisions, the policies, of course, are being defined by the political class. And we have identified a problem pertaining education. It's a challenge to our political leaders. So now, as a professor of information, in charge of information and communication, we are in a world that is actually challenging. So what do you think are the proposals, practical proposals that governments can adopt, especially as far as providing the necessary ecosystem or the scope for students to try to maybe put their abilities into practice? This is skills development. When children acquire skills, there is need to have the ecosystem that they can be able to perform or to test this analysis and check things by themselves. How can the political class of the African continent ensure that the educational system, especially in today's world, meets the changing times, especially along the lines of technological development?
Well, you are right to mention that education cannot be separated from politics, unfortunately. However, what we should do, we should keep an eye on those who are using and abusing of education behind that for political motives. That exactly, unfortunately, there was a lot of interference of politics within education. And when politics is meddling with education, is the end of education by itself, because here we are using students, we are using boys as scapegoat for political objectives and aims. Therefore, what we should do, I think, I don't think that we have to have some, like we assisted in the 70s and 80s, a massive, I would say, shift of students to go to Europe, to Japan, to elsewhere to get knowledge. Knowledge is made available through the technology. We live in an interconnected world, and therefore, we should have been having invested in this technology, in the whole condition of having an ecosystem based on technology, on equipment, on hardware, and of course, and then give a chance to people, to students in their within their own country to develop. They have the equipment, but they need their own skills. We need how to build their own programs. And we speak about software, we speak about programming, we speak about application. So because technology is being democratized, if I may say so, changes of information are very rapid and so fast. So what we need now, we need to safeguard the specificities. Of course, we may have some values which are shared worldwide, but within these global values, we have also specific and particular values, and here we should respect each other. We should safeguard this. of course, we speak about the emergence of multipolar system. What does it mean, multipolar system? This multipolar system is in response to the globalization, which remove all kind of differences and of kind of specificities. The globalization is one way or the other to remove people's personality, people identity, and that's really what happened now in the whole world. Everything is standardized. Unfortunately, we see the same things, and we end up having one system, one world with one unique system. And although we have so rich values, a rich diversity of culture, diversity of creation, and so forth, so needs now is to introduce a new notion that globalization is the end of humanity. That's what we need now. We need the emergence of different multipolar system with different culture, but they coexist in very peaceful way. So that's okay, good to have, but as I said again and again, we need to listen to each other. We need to respect each other, and this only can be done through talking, explaining, communicating, without any with negative or stigmatization of this or that. Actually, all languages are not poor. They have there are not poor culture and cheap culture, and rich culture or language. But all have their own dignity, their own respect, and that's why we should. Now the whole world should understand that the massive attitude of globalization has come out of it. I would say dramatic situation, and now within the financial institution they are blaming the fragmentation. Okay, fragmentation is bad. But of course, good to have a new order, equitable new order of communication, new order of education, new order of financial and economy, as long as we benefit the whole world. But when we have countries, what we inherit from the Second World War too, this financial and banking institution which try to impose. They give you the money, but at the same time there is a condition. They want to remove your culture, your specificity. That does not work. So we have to think, the whole humanity should think in a new approach that based on respect, regardless of the difference of each other.
Very imperative. It is a more globalized world and a multipolar world. And Julia Berg, we want to analyze this very important aspect. You know, when we talk about education, it also brings about cultural understanding. But if we look at it clearly, the Western system seems to have killed, especially in Africa, the connected, the cultural maybe connectedness with the people. I would take in the aspect of maybe the language. It's very difficult in Africa. We still do not have a language that is very common across the African continent that can facilitate easy communication for better understanding. And of course, we know that some of the cultural values have been killed with the civilization, and even with colonialization. It made some sort of African cultures to look so inferior, and it has affected even the mindset. And you see, people sometimes do not feel free aligning to their cultural values. But then, like Professor mentioned, it is a multilateral world, and we are engaging more and more alliances or more and more partners. Now we know that the Russian Federation is one country that is so adhered or attached to its cultural values, and particularly to its language. And given this new world order that it's already on the way, how can, in collaboration with Russia-Africa partnership, how can they help to instill these cultural values that can even help the major stakeholders to identify some of the tools of leadership embedded in the culture of the population or of a particular country?
Well, I would split the question into two parts, and the first part would be dedicated to the perception of culture and own culture and preservation of own cultural values. And the other part would be about languages. So when we talk about culture, of course, a lot was done externally to wipe out the cultural heritage. When we talk about Africa, it's even about taking out many of the let's say items related to cultural heritage, especially when we talk about countries like Libya, when we talk about Egypt, a lot was taken out from there, but also in West Africa, in South Africa, I mean, all over the place. And the discourse dedicated to bringing those items back has been quite topical, right?
Sure.
So when we talk about the UK, for instance, in some cases it was even giving out things that it stole from Egypt as gifts. For example, me being from St. Petersburg, there is one of the Sphinx, let's say, statute installed at the embankment in St. Petersburg, and it was stolen from Egypt by the UK and then given to St. Petersburg as a gift to its, if I'm not mistaken, 200 years anniversary, right?
Yeah.
So we can see examples of that quite widespread, but we also see a tendency of African countries claiming their right for their cultural heritage. But it also has to happen in terms of, you know, the way people think, because the sorry about that, because the traditional and cultural values that societies are based on are being substituted by values again of you know, fame and money and you know, other values that are quite fake since they're not constructive, they're not contributing to the development of the society itself. And so when we come to the second part, which is languages, I think the issue will be easily solved by artificial intelligence. We'll already see the technology that is quite fast in making translations, right? So I think the AI would help us communicate in a better way. Yes, we will see the artificial intelligence helping us communicate in a better way, and we already see various kinds of apps that solve the issue. So just give it 3-5 years, and this will be solved. Yet, what remains topical is the languages used in science books, especially when we talk about fundamental science. So this is not easy to translate. Of course, the AI would never be able to, you know, take up all of the little details. And when we talk about literature, when we talk about poetry, it's not so easy. Yet basic communication also within the African continent will be much easier once the technology comes in to help.
Absolutely, and of course that's one thing that will unite the African continent and enable stakeholders to unanimously stand as one, building the spirit of Pan-Africanism, identifying even better the tenets of Pan-Africanism. It's about understanding how education at every level can transform the country, transform the leadership, both present and future leadership. If you just to add to what you've said, dear Yulia, if actually countries were not conversant of the importance of their cultural values, I think it wouldn't. The story would have still been the same. But then today we see how countries across Africa actually demanding that these very valuable valuable historical instruments can be returned to their respective country. We can relate the saga between Namibia and Germany, and now we know we just heard that the British Museum is in private talks with some government on how they can return some artifacts that were taken from their respective countries. And of course, that is the power of I think informal education, how the population has been very conversant, seeing the need to preserve what is theirs, to preserve their culture. Now, and of course, it will help to boost the tourism sector and even bring in money to various countries. Let me come back to you, Mr. Kovalik. We have identified some major problems, seeing how even the political narratives across the global world can change the perspective and even change the educational system. Now, let's look at the role of the international community in solving some of these basic problems, basic but major problems at the international level. We can take the impending Olympics game. We already noticed that some countries that are actually friends with the Russian Federation are being sidelined, and they are urged to either participate as individuals without identifying some values of the country. And of course, another very critical being sidelining countries that are attached to, or athletes that are from various countries, for example, Belarus, and we have even the Russian Federation and other countries from participating in these games. And we want to see the impact of such a decision on the athletes themselves, on the future generation or aspiring students who want to identify in that perspective. How can the international community work in such a way that international disputes will have little or no effect, especially on the younger population, the susceptible children?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on how you define the international community. Sadly, the international community is split pretty severely between the West, and when I say the West, I really mean just the U.S., Canada, Western Europe, and Australia, and everyone else, right? But sadly, the West controls a lot of the instruments of power and a lot of the international institutions, like the International Olympic Committee, which, yes, is attempting to, of course, sideline countries like Russia in the Olympics, which I oppose. I oppose that type of isolation of countries like Russia. I think, you know, what countries outside the West need to do is create their own institutions to compete with the Western-dominated institutions, with things like the Olympics. If the International Olympic Committee is going to continue to try to isolate Russia, then I think countries outside the West need to create their own games, for example. There needs to be alternatives to all these Western-dominated institutions, including, I think, the United Nations. The UN has been totally hijacked by the West. It now is totally ineffective at dealing with things like the genocide in Gaza, right? You now have the International Court of Justice now twice issuing provisional measures against Israel, and neither Israel nor the West are abiding by those. You just had a Security Council resolution, which the U.S. actually abstained from, which allowed it to pass, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. And then the U.S. says, well, that's a non-binding resolution, which, of course, is totally untrue. Well, when you get to that point where these institutions can't deal with the most important issues of our day, like genocide in Gaza, then I think it's time to create new institutions. And I think, you know, it's up to, again, the world outside the West to start doing that.
and very imperative. We almost culminating with the program, but then briefly, Professor Laïda, we want to look at the way forward. Now, the question is, we identified already the misinformation and disinformation. So the question is, in what ways can educational initiatives address the challenges of disinformation, and of course promote critical thinking and promote skills among future leaders in this era of information war?
Well, I think critical thinking, academic freedom have to be secured within each institution, educational institution. It should be enshrined in the policy, in the education policy. Otherwise, we have to review overall our way of educating people, our way of offering education people. What are the basic? What are the key values? The key values of how to educate. What are the methods? And critical thinking means you have to be critical within your own country, but not denigrating, not criticizing just for the sake of criticizing. So I think each country should think about how to secure, how to build up, how to give immunity for their own students, their own people who are enrolled on education, by giving them the real arms to defend themselves, and to give them this strong leadership we want to know. Because as I said earlier in my paper, leadership is about, of course, about morality, about integrity, about character, about empathy, about understanding, about modesty, and on top of that is also intellectual honesty. And as Dan said already, what we see worldwide now, I would say, monopolistic and megalomaniac, and I would say even monopolistic attitude of Western countries. They want to impose the way they are developing their education system. They want to impose their own system, political system, leadership, scientific leadership, and that we many countries in the world are at the mercy. And more than that, more importantly, when you speak about critical thinking, we have to define it within your own context, because what we see now, for instance, worldwide, now with the war coming to its third year between Russia and Ukraine, it's at the end of the day, one has to ask, why should we have this war? Why the West is supporting Ukraine? Is supporting Ukraine, bearing in mind that Russia is aggressor? But what happened now in Gaza, and just a few days ago, the Security Council has adopted the resolution to stop for ceasefire, but unfortunately nothing has happened. Yesterday, the hospital of Shifa is left in rubble. Can you imagine that? More than that, USA is continuing to support, to provide arms to Israel. What can you do? So we are living in a world of jungle. But in the end of the day, that's why now there is a reality: the West versus the rest of the world. Now the world cannot accept anymore this attitude of despising and of belittling the rest of the world. That's why there is some kind of resistance, and of course the humanity is now suffering for this double standard attitude of the West, because as I said, we inherit the whole system. Political, economic, financial system we inherited from the Second World War has come to the end. We should now think sincerely and fairly to talk together and to renew. Otherwise, we will end up. The humanity will be suffering more and more, and no way Why? Because the values or let's make it the concept of, for instance, freedom of the press, the concept of democracy, the concept of I would say freedom of democracy and human rights and so forth have been interpreted differently. Now, there was a book I mentioned already in one of my exposé. There was a book by the French essayist called Emmanuel Todd. He spoke about the defeat of the Western. In other words, he is Western. He's French. He admitted, he confessed openly and overtly that the West has the culture, the civilization of the West has collapsed, and even some of leaders, politicians in France, they admit that democracy, Western democracy, is no more the path to follow, is no more the reference. Well, now we are about to have new values that are at least more or less fair and objective and respectful to all different people in the whole world. That's exactly what now I'm convinced myself. I remember, because when you look at the way Western double standards and the way they are behaving in the war in Ukraine and what's happening in Gaza, I see there are, of course, a lot of subjectivity, a lot of one-sided, and the whole problem is that the West will not accept that the emergence of countries, a great country like Russia and like, of course, China, and that's the whole issue. Thank you.
And thank you for the great insight, Professor Laïda. Dear Yulia, let me come to you with this question. When we look at the decisions taken by some leaders for political reasons, we see the effects falling on the local population, especially the susceptible ones. So the question is, how can the cross-border collaborations or the collaborations that will come with a new world, and in the world of multipolarity, and of course in line with some educational exchange programs, how can they contribute to maybe building or nurturing a new generation of leaders who will prioritize peace building and conflict resolution on a global scale? It's about mitigating the effect of the global crisis on the population at every level.
We need to understand that we have already come to a point when the world will just not be what we used to see it, and the pace at which the changes are taking place is incredible. I mean, it's unprecedented, absolutely unprecedented. So the leadership of that new period of time would have to require a lot more responsibility, a lot more honesty. Again, being able to raise cognitive skills that would ensure being able to adapt to changing environment, cooperate, and again be ready that there is no more privacy. I think it will have to do along with economic processes as well, because if before you could easily manipulate the economy, manipulate various kinds of deals and everything, now it's just not going to be possible. So one of the key skills that would have to be raised and would have to be taken up by leadership, right, is being able to, let's say, on the one hand, stay strong within own value set, and on the other hand, be flexible enough to adapt to various kinds of changes.
Yeah, it's of course to be adaptable to the various kinds of change that will come. Let me get to you, Dana Kovalyk, especially on this question which I directed to Yulia. You may want to share your perspective on either. How can we mitigate the effects of the global crisis, especially on the susceptible population children or the innocent population, and through educational programs, and of course even on platform like this Global Insight, we're already analyzing how stakeholders, major world stakeholders, can prioritize decision making that will build rather than destroy.
Yeah, well, that is the key that has to happen. We need to build a world that is putting money in, as you say, into creation instead of destruction, right? Into social programs, including education, instead of military funding. And again, who's the biggest, villain in terms of that? And that's the United States, which spends more money on the military than all other countries combined. And meanwhile is neglecting even its own population in terms of social spending. There needs to be international institutions created that require the world to change its priorities in terms of military spending versus social spending, and to make sure that, frankly, the so-called developed world, which became developed by plundering the global South, contributes much more to the global South in terms of social spending, in terms of food aid and aid for sustainable development. Those are things that have to be part of the new world that is being born now in the BRICS and other alternative institutions.
Of course, very imperative. Let me stay with you, Mr. Kovalik. Now, the question is, how do you think this recent shift in global power affected the role of the United Nations and even other international organizations in maintaining peace and security?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure it has yet. I mean, honestly, again, when you look at what's happening in the world right now, while BRICS has a greater impact and influence in the world, it still has not been able to counter the influence and domination of the West. And again, we see this particularly with the situation in Gaza, where the institutions we have, the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, they're not able to maintain international peace and security, which is their main goal, right? That was laid down in 1945, and they're not doing that. I mean, again, I think the BRICS has done a good job at doing the best they can to influence those institutions and to bring about some good decisions from those institutions, like the recent Security Council resolution, like the International Court of Justice decisions that have been rendered. But they have not been able to ensure that those decisions and resolutions are implemented. And they're not being implemented. And I think it will probably take affirmative action on the part of countries like Russia and China to act to implement those types of decisions. And they are going to have to do it outside the West and outside Western approval. And that's something I hope they have the courage to do.
That is what is imperative, and that's where the bone of contention lies. It's about having a leadership that is people-oriented, a leadership that is transformational, a leadership that will prioritize development, destruction, a leadership that will put the interest of the people first rather than its political aspirations or political interests. I want to take this opportunity opportunity now to extend immense gratitude to the panel of experts we had this day in the person of Professor Laid, Algiers University in the Faculty of Information and Communication. I want to appreciate your great insight on our topic for this day. And to you, the American human rights lawyer Daniel Kovalik, thank you for the deeper understanding on the topic for discussion this day. And Julia Berger, political scientist, founder Global Experts Club. It was a great time getting the better understanding of how we can use education as a major tool to change leadership patterns across the global world, with the aim of mitigating the negative or the adverse effects of what the population is facing, patterning decisions taken by global leaders. It's about having a mindset that is intentional and practical and transformational. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for always trusting the Pan-African Television. It will be on this note that we will draw the curtains into today's edition of Global Insight, but that is not all. Keep having a lovely moment in the company of programs on For You Media. Remember, it's another view of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you all.